Well, happy April 29th. As you can tell, we had ourselves a pretty incredible morning here in Nebraska. I've got Lewis Miller, who's one of our newest interns, and over yonder is Ethan Stubbs, a past intern and a really, really great friend of mine. We left at midnight. There's another bird dead behind me. We were able to have an epic hunt. So if you guys haven't been following along on the Chasing Red side of things, a lot of cool hunts. Actually, today's episode with David Williams there in Kentucky's going live, and we got plenty of other hunts coming that way. You know, we got Collins Marine, who had a epic 5-yard, I mean, the closest I've ever seen a turkey walk by somebody, and the list goes on and on. So if you're turkey hunting, if you like turkey hunting, check that out. We'd really greatly appreciate that. Before we move into this week's show, I wanted to bring to your attention, we've got some new apparel there on the website. So if you're looking for some Chasing Red stuff, Midwest Whitetail, go check it out. Appreciate the support immensely. And yeah, so that leads me into this week's episode. You know, we are going to be joining Mike Reed, who's going to be talking about pretty much just kind of like what Owen did last week's show. The best places on the river farm to hunt, how he got there, you know, bought the farm back in 2017, and then it's just been kind of a piece by piece to today where, you know, yes, it's the spring, but Mike's already thinking with rye, strategizing, coming up with the plan for fall. You got different bucks, a ton of different things to think about. And then one thing, you know, because I'm kind of in that same mindset, you know, drop time's kind of been the nemesis of mine for the last year. When we brought the episode of the shed hunt, didn't find any of his antlers, and wouldn't you know it, about 80 yards from the trail camera, we were getting all the video and photos of him. The landowner humbled me and found his left side. And it's just a beautiful antler, you know, super heavy, beautiful 5-point side, and really put into perspective, you know, quality of animal that we were chasing. And it gets me super excited for next year. But one thing that was really funny, and I'm pretty ashamed of, this 6x5 match set that Gavin and I found on that shed hunt. Well, I was walking inside, and wouldn't you know it, felt like pretty stupid. You know, so now we've got a match set to drop time. We've got one from last year. You know, a total of 4 antlers, a lot of information, a lot of history we're developing there. And my brain is starting to think about fall. What plots could I put in? Gonna work with the landowner and see if we can make that come to fruition. So I'm really excited to watch this episode. Mike he's one of the best killers that I know, and he puts the pieces together well before he ever gets into the woods. So let's join him, let's get into his brain, dive into his strategy. And as always, we appreciate you guys taking the time to watch.
Hey guys, welcome back to another week of Midwest Whitetail. We are at the end of April here. We're dodging storms, crazy temperature swings, lots of rain, and focusing on getting some of our off-season projects done. On this week's episode, we're gonna break down the north end of the river farm. And this is a 224-acre farm that was purchased back in 2017. The south end I bought a few years later, and we're gonna cover that in another episode. We just wanted to go through the progression of the property, some of the limitations of the property being in a wetland, and observations over the years, how we're planting food and how I'm tackling hunting it throughout the year. And hopefully some of these strategies that I'm using, you'll be able to apply on your own properties and the places you hunt. As most of you know, right now is the planning process for the year. This is where most of the important work that leads to success in the fall is occurring. So thinking about the food and thinking about what we're putting in each plot and how we're going to tackle this year, what changes we're going to make from the past. And as Ryan and I have been going through all this stuff, we thought it might be valuable for some of you guys to know our thought process and how we go about doing things. So I realize there's lots of options for food plot seed. We use Monster Buck. They're a great partner. We've had great success with them. And one of the cool things about them, not only do they have a super high quality seed product, there's no fillers, it's great seed, great germ rates, but they also back that up with a full guarantee. So that's something worth knowing. That's something that you don't see that a lot with food plot seed companies. So if you put that seed in the ground, you're not happy with the germination, they fully guarantee their product and they'll get you more seed or get you your money back. So if you guys are in the market for that, we have a code that we can share with you, MWW, that gives you 20% off all the seed lines on their website. This property is 224 acres, as I mentioned. Let's see, 10 acres are across the river and 14 acres are river and 52 acres are the peninsula that's not in wetland. It's all timber and bedding. So you start chopping those things off, you drop down to about 150 acres of wetland. Now the wetland, it's a permanent easement, it's a WRP, and there's a lot of limitations to what you can do with it. You can't make money on it, you can't harvest timber on it, you can't plant stuff without a plan, can't mess with the trees. There's just lots of rules and limitations through the NRCS branch of the USDA office. Previous owner enrolled it in the easement. It's a one-time payment, and it's enrolled in that for the perpetuity of the land. You know, one of the advantages of buying a wetland is you get it at a lower price point per acre. And that was attractive to me as I was first buying land. You know, land's expensive, it's hard to buy it, and the wetlands are more affordable and they're great for recreational use. And so the way we go about getting into this, the ability to do things on it, it's called a compatibility use agreement. And so you have to meet out there with the NRCS and come up with a plan on how you want to use it and what they'll let you do on it. And one of the things with the CUA is you can do 5% of the wetland into food plots. And we were limited when we first bought the property to where we could put those, especially from an ag perspective, to plant corn or beans in a wetland. The previous owner had it in wetland, he had his own CUA, and he had the food plots picked out. And then native grasses are planted, the wetland is farmed, and that was way back in '99. And so the NRCS really wants you to continue to use those same areas, otherwise you have to replant the old areas to natives and switch stuff around. But in that 150 acres, there only was a few areas that really lent itself to the ag anyway, and they had already been planted and farmed, and so that's what we stuck with. So we had some ability to decide where we wanted to put turnip plots, and we actually just looked at the map and kind of put 3 originally, a north, a south, and an east. So as with any food plot design, food plot architecture planning, you're trying to think about the tree, you know, where can you get a stand, or if you need to put a blind there, what's my access gonna be, you know, and how the deer might use it. So where are they bedding? Where are they coming from? It's interesting over the years to watch these patterns and how they change even throughout the season. One thing that stood out about that particular plot, the north plot, is they had a nice little patch of cottonwoods on the northeast side of it. So one of the disadvantages of cottonwoods is they lose their leaves early, and they tend to be telephone pole trees with a head on them. Those particular trees there had some good branches, they were bigger trees, and it allowed us to add some artificial cover to those trees and be able to hunt it farther into the fall. Great access to that spot though. You know, where we park on that property, mowed lanes, you can slip right in and out of that stand. That was one of the immediate obvious advantages of that area. The initial pattern that we saw was deer in the peninsula working their way out through the pinch in the afternoon, working through the park, heading off to all the ag fields to the north. The way the creek runs across the north boundary, they tend to cut right through that low area. And so putting food there and a stand there was an obvious choice as sort of a staging plot. Over the years, as we got more ag into the river bottom, that's changed some, but that general pattern is still the main pattern we're hunting. The main change we noticed is as I got better at figuring out how to grow food that was corn or beans down there, they have more options to go feed. So before, the only options were the commercial ag fields to the north. Now we'll see deer come out of that peninsula, and some will head east and some will head south, and a certain percentage of them will head north and continue to follow that pattern. But it used to basically be every deer that came out of that peninsula worked its way to the north. A little bit of that's just dependent on the deer. Each one of those bucks, I tend to see different patterns in them, and so it's still a very functional spot on the farm. I've always done brassicas there, and then we'll top dress some radishes in front of the stands. And I used to only hunt that on a south wind, just because I thought, well, blowing a north back into the farm wouldn't work. And last year was one of the first times I pulled a blind in there, just trying to get after DK and using information on the trail cameras. And we had a ton of success hunting that redneck blind on the south end of that plot and blowing a north-northwest wind back down that tree line. Deer coming out of the peninsula wouldn't get our wind, and deer coming from the main wetland area were staying north of us. I started pulling a blind on the north end of that plot about 3 years ago, and we normally just hunt it during youth, and we've had success. Bella shot JT there. Had some good hunts last year when we had that southeast wind. Another theme that I'll talk about throughout this video is the mowed lanes. We used to just have a very rudimentary trail system there, and as I saw certain movement patterns, I started adding mowed lanes. One of the limitations of the river bottom farm, I mean, there's no topography. It's just flat, and the vast majority of it's grass or little willow thickets. You don't have the aid of certain things to drive deer movement. They love to walk those mowed lanes, path of least resistance. You got a nice mowed lane, they're gonna tend to walk on it. And so I've strategically through observation, mowed lanes in there that have really aided us in driving that deer movement. Also, it's very useful for access. We can get the bikes on those lanes. One of the biggest things I do from a scent perspective, rubber knee boots and minimizing vegetation. And so you keep them mowed short, and then we use them as fire breaks. And all of those are advantages to keeping those lanes mowed short throughout the year. So for this year, I'm gonna do what's worked the last couple years. We're gonna get the monster buck rut greens in there. I do plan on, again, topping it with radishes closer to season, particularly, the main buck I'm looking at this year right now, based off of last year, is gonna be hunting moss. Was really utilizing that area a lot. Early season, I think that's gonna be an area that I can hopefully capitalize. So gonna move those blinds back in. We'll have a clover base, get some rut greens in there, likely top with radishes right in front of those setups. The clover plot is just a little ditzel of a plot. I mean, it's a 40-yard by 40-yard area. And it was originally put there just because it was a useless little canary patch. And what we've noticed over the years is, particularly in the early season, is a pattern of movement into the property through that area. Our mature bucks are moving right at last light, and that was a spot that would give us potentially the chance to get one of those bucks in bow range early season. There's not a whole lot to say about that. It's actually right near where we park. You can slip in and out pretty easily. And I've actually used that spot sometimes when I'm just too busy at work to get out as soon as I want. I know deer are probably in the plots already. That's a spot that the movement is so late. I can slip in there for an hour-and-a-half hunt and not go all the way into one of the other plots. There's a nice tree to hunt on a north wind. It's not a heavily utilized area, but if you've got a specific buck that you're after that's hitting it, it sets up well for that. The last piece to the north end of the property is the north ag plot. It's 2.5 acres or so. We try to put beans there primarily for late season, and I've done beans, done corn. For sure, the best thing that works is beans down there on the river bottom. The corn doesn't seem to last. The coon damage is too much. The deer end up eating it before season's out, and we've noticed that pattern, so I'm just gonna stick with beans on the property. Last year was my first year using the no-till Great Plains drill, and that was one of the things I was able to change and modify to have better success growing some ag plots down there on the river bottom farm. Like last year was a super bad drought year. Some years it's too wet. Obviously it's large areas, but to be able to go in and spray and just come behind and drill and preserve some of that soil moisture, like a year like last year, it really aided us in having success with our food plots. Bella had success on this plot 2 years ago shooting the 6x6. We've had good hunts over the years out of that, even in October and November. It's a difficult spot to hunt with a bow. There's a cottonwood tree on the north side of it, and early season I've shot does there. Again, you're looking at that south to north movement out to the commercial ag. We primarily use it for late season hunting. I've modified it over the last few years after some observations. What I see is deer come out of that wetland, and then they'll eat in the beans, and then they tend to cross the trail into that north turnip plot. And originally we had the redneck blind all the way on the north end of the plot, and it was probably 60 yards away from where they crossed. And so I've actually shortened up that plot. One of the reasons we had the plot where it was to have a tree stand in the tree and have some cover walking in on the mowed lane. But I'm gonna replant some natives there. We've moved the redneck blind up 40 yards, and now it works beautifully to hunt with a bow, where deer will come into that plot, they'll feed, and then cross over into the turnips. And as I continue to think about how I can make that area better, I've had success getting them in bow range there for Bella with the crossbow with the 6x6. I've done that by using the overcast blend just into the beans to give them something else to nibble on before they work their way over to that other turnip plot. And I think what I'm gonna do to modify even further is I'm actually gonna till those beans in just a 20-yard strip right in front of the blind and have a good lush rut green plot there, where they'll work into the beans and then just work their way towards the greens and then continue on that pattern. I'm hoping that gives us more success with the archery tackle. The access for the north bean plot is very similar to the turnip plot. From the parking lot, we got the mowed lane, and then you basically either walk 60 yards to the turnips or walk 60 yards to that north end of that bean plot. That's a general overview of the north side of the north portion of the river bottom farm. It's provided a lot of opportunity for us over the years. I'm excited to see if we can have success there again this year. going after moss. Just a few hundred yards to the south, we have the south beans and the south turnip plot. And this area interacts very tightly with the peninsula and the pinch. In fact, a lot of the deer that are working their way to the north, I mean, they're coming through this area first. Now, in some years, the food there has been consumed more quickly because it's closer to bedding, and that's led to better hunts on the north side. Or as you could see from last year, I mean, we were spending a ton of time hunting the south ag because the deer were just holding up there. There was enough food there to hold them there. We'll start with the south turnip plot. It was probably the most attractive area for a green plot when we first bought the farm. Inside corner, right up against all the bedding, good oaks to get stands in. And so that was one that kind of jumped right out at us on the map. Access, it's a little bit more difficult just because you're coming through so much of the farm, but we stay on the periphery of the farm, on the east edge, come down, and then we can come across straight from the west. When we originally designed that plot, we made it as big as possible to maximize acres and put every acre of food plot that we could get in there according to the CUA. And then over time, we shrunk it to make it more huntable by bow. And now what I'm seeing is it's getting browsed too heavily. So it's right up to the bedding area. Probably gonna make it a little bit bigger this year, modify maybe a licking branch or something to try to get bucks in front of the stand. Now the tree stand location has been modified over the years. When we first put a tree stand there, we're hunting that food plot on a west wind or a northwest wind. So we had the stand on the east, southeast corner. And we're in a big red oak, about 15 yards off the plot. That just wasn't working. Deer were kind of filtering into the west corner and then working their way to the north. Then we moved it into a maple right on the edge. And that's actually the tree I shot Todd Gurley out of back in 2019. And he wasn't even in the plot. He was just skirting the edge of the plot, working out to the freshly cut beans. Same tree I hunted it late season and missed merino out of with the muzzle loader. And over the years hunting that tree, you just felt a little bit out of the game. And so I moved to that little pin oak a couple years ago. We've had more success getting deer in bow range. I've not had a buck that I've shot there, but I've had good encounters, and we've done a fair amount of doe harvest there early in the year. And one of the other things I've been considering modifying it further is utilization of a blind. The only huntable trees are on that south edge, and the way the deer come out and work across going to the north, I think if I put a blind on the northeast corner of that food plot, I'm gonna have even better luck getting them in bow range, and it's gonna give me a few more wind options. I also think it would open up some late season options there, because where the deer bed late season and the lack of foliage and things like that, I can't really get into that plot very well without spooking deer. So I've been hanging back on the ag plot late season. And the ag plots worked well. I mean, probably the best setup I've had is the redneck blind on the dike. Great access late season down the lane, and a lot of the deer just don't get downwind of you. The way they work off to the north. It also, for deer still being in the plot, when you pop out of the blind, you can work your way back out behind that dike. And I shot Kelsey there a couple years ago. That was the first year that I hunted it a lot. You know, one of the disadvantages is there's cover in all directions, and you got to give up something. But the vast majority of deer come out of that peninsula. They either work by the natives or they come through the south plot first and then work into that plot. The narrowest part of that plot is the long west finger. And so we pulled that blind in there last year for archery hunting and crossbow hunting, and had some great hunts. And obviously my little boy Tate had success on daggers. That's gonna, I think, work really well for us moving forward. I think the addition of a blind on the south turnips will be another option whenever you have a more northerly wind, because the way that sits, it's hard to hunt the ag plot on a north wind. And then the other modification I plan on making is there's a bunch of canary grass right there, and I think I can put a rut greens plot there, and again, give them something to want to walk closer to the blind and be in bow range. So I've got two little spots that I'm gonna do that on each side of the bottom of the horseshoe. Where the Kelsey blind is on the dike, there's a little patch of willows that I think I can till under and put brassicas. And ideally, again, thinking of how to get these deer into bow range. And last but not least, I should touch on the pinch and the head of the slough. These areas are right off of these south plots. The south plots are in the more wetland area, and then it transitions into the timber along the river and into the peninsula. We've talked a lot about the pinch. I spent a lot of time hunting there. It's extra good October, November. All those deer that are bedded in the peninsula, they work their way up through there, off to the north. And I've changed the movement patterns a little bit, like I mentioned, figuring out how to grow good food sources in the middle of the farm. But still, all in all, it's such an effective spot. It's arguably better in the morning than the afternoon. I have trouble having repeated success in the pinch in the afternoon because they can kind of come out and go one of many ways. But in the morning, the deer are off the property. We sneak in from the east, use thermals to our advantage, and then catch all these deer filtering their way back in the bed. And whichever food plot they're in, they tend to funnel back down to that pinch and come through there. That pattern was something that you could pick off of a map, and we saw it from day one through observation. Last year, you guys saw, we spent a lot of time hunting there. The mass crop even made it better because they were actually hanging out there even longer. It's just a sweet spot that I'm sure will produce for us year over year. Last but not least, we'll cover the head of the slough. And this is one that doesn't jump out on you on an aerial photograph. It's a little hard to pick it out. You can see where the slough sort of tapers out there and just dissipates into the timber. Previous owner did have a stand there. I did have the advantage of walking around the property with him and talking about some of the things that he had observed and liked. And then that first year, we spent time hunting more in the peninsula and were noticing certain movement patterns. And then boots on the ground, the head of the slough almost worked like the head of a ditch, right? They tend to walk around the head of it, and there's a big red oak there that the stand's in. It's definitely not a foolproof area. It's a difficult spot to hunt in the afternoon because you're basically walking into the bedding area. I've done it a few times, and the slough does provide you access. If you can, especially if you have wind cover, you can slide up that slough, and that stands right at the end of the slough. I've crept in there with deer bedded 30 yards away and gotten in the stand. I've also had deer bust me. I've had deer come cruising through there as we're at the base of the tree, so the afternoon's a lot harder. You can't really hunt the pinch in the morning with the south wind because all of the deer are coming from the north. And so when I've got a south wind and I want to be in that general area, I tend to rotate down to the head of the slough when the wind's south-southwest. And it just works that our access is through the slough, and then we blow our wind back up the slough. So we're just giving up that one spot. Instead of hunting the main pattern of deer coming through the pinch, a lot of deer that are coming from the east and from the south walk by that tree. You still get deer that are coming through the pinch or through the wetlands, through the natives, they enter and come by there. So you're not totally cutting off all the north movement. In fact, we filmed Moss a few times there last year, and he was coming from the north. It's extra good in the morning with thermals helping you. So I like a real light wind situation with a sunny day and thermals rising. And once the foliage drops, I can actually see the river. So it's a couple hundred yards, I can see the river on both sides. So anything coming back in there, particularly late October, November in a callable situation, the deer, because it's the bedding area and there's so much cover in there, they just feel comfortable being in there. And so you can just have these unbelievable hunts where the action never stops. It's just all morning long. There's deer chasing and coming back in and running around, cruising by it. With a west wind, the bucks can literally cut the peninsula, just cut across the neck and scent check that whole peninsula. And it's a spot that I'm always super excited when we're heading in there. You just never know what's gonna happen, and it's a really fun spot. One of the challenges of the property is that the whole thing is cover. You know, you've got two different types of habitat where you've got a big timber, river bottom timber in the peninsula that from the very beginning was fairly obviously bedding, and over time I've essentially left that as sanctuary. I just don't go in there. I want the deer to feel comfortable in there, and I hunt that pattern coming to and from. The rest of the property being the wetland and the willow thickets and the grass, particularly as I increase cover by getting switchgrass and different native patches in there, deer bed out there too. I still treat it in general as the peninsula is the main bedding. I've got the grasslands and the willow thickets for horizontal cover since there's no topography. I utilize my mowed access lanes, keep my scent footprint down, quietly get in and out. And for essentially 150 huntable acres, it's been one of the most productive farms I've ever hunted. I think it's going to continue to do that. As I realized over time how good that farm was and knew that it was going to be a piece of ground that I was going to hold on to for a long time, I started looking at ways to add on to it, and I was fortunate in 2020 to be able to add on additional 340 acres of wetland that bordered the south end of it. It's interesting, it's different dynamic, even though it's right next door. It does give me the ability to manage the herd a little more because, again, half the deer on the north side of the farm come from the north and the other half come from the south. And so being able to buy up that land to the south, I'm able to track some of these deer throughout the season that transition down that way like Kelsey did, Fitzmagic did last year. And also just to put more food in the property and just manage the herd better and have a little bit different hunting strategy able to be applied to that. In a future episode, we're gonna go ahead and break down that property, what I've learned about it, and how I go about tackling hunting that piece. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Hopefully some of these things that I've learned over the years, you guys can apply to your situation. We're always trying to share what we've learned, our mistakes, how we've grown over the years with our viewers, and again, hopefully it's useful to some of you. We really appreciate all the support, and we'll see you back next week.